Vamos, eh? So this is our 1998 Mini Cooper Classic, and it's a great car to go around, but it's a bit small to carry extra stuff. And a few weeks ago we installed this roof rack, but we wanted to build a deck to carry additional luggage. So in this video we're going to show you how we are using an Ikea bed to build this wooden rack to carry the stuff that you don't want to carry in the car. So I hope you enjoy, and yeah, let's get on with it. Are you ready to go?
Yeah.
All right. And let's go. ¿A qué te ha encantado eso? So a few weeks ago I installed this roof rack on my 1998 Mini Cooper Classic, and it is a great addition because I can carry stuff on the roof which does not fit on the car, like, you know, maybe a toolbox or maybe a dead body or something like that. But it is missing something, which is a surface on which I can actually secure whatever cargo I'm bringing. And at first I thought I'm going to use hardwood to create a surface, like a deck to put stuff on. But then I found these old Ikea bed slats, or bed frame slats, I don't know what they're called, but they are basically the perfect fit. So they have the right curvature, the right length, and they are pretty sturdy. They're made out of plywood, so this means I need to treat them to make sure that they sustain or they survive outside. But this is basically what this video is about. I'm going to build a surface for my mini rooftop rack out of recycled bed frame Ikea wood pieces. So I hope you enjoy. The first thing I like to do is to take all the pieces and put them in place so that I get an impression on what this is going to look like, how many pieces am I going to use, and the overall shape of the structure that I'm going to build. In general, I like to take some measurements just to get an idea on size and how much material I'm going to be using in case I need to buy, let's say, additional stock or so. One of the first things I will need to do is to clean up the slats because they do have staples and stickers, and before I'm going to mount them or treat them, I need to clean all this up. Now, yes, I'm using my chisel because it's an old chisel and, you know, who cares? But in hindsight, it might not have been the best choice since I got a little cut on my hand. Now, the stickers were quite a pain to remove because they had been there for a very long time, and, you know, the wood had been outside unattended, so I decided to just not remove them and then sand them over with the sanding machine. These overall took quite a long while, but eventually I got all the pieces sufficiently clean so that they could be sanded over. Now, this was a bit trickier than I expected because the slats, they have this strange curvature, and this make the process of holding them in place rather challenging. So I had to try a couple of different methods until I found the right way with the clamps in, you know, a couple of places so that I could sand over all the old varnish that was there, that was also a bit damaged from the weather, and to get all the pieces sufficiently smooth for treating them further to sustain the outside weather. This took overall quite a bit of time because there were 14 pieces in total, and I had to make sure that they were really smooth and there was no leftover old varnish on them, so that the product that I was going to use could penetrate the wood sufficiently. One of the things I enjoy the most about sanding, it's actually peeling off the old sanding disc and then putting a new one in place. And there I go, just sanding and sanding and sanding a bit more until I got all the pieces right where I wanted them. At this point, I like to put everything back where it's going to be mounted, so I can start thinking about, you know, dimensions, spacing, mounting options, and so on and so forth. So I put all the slats back in place, and I make a little spacing template so that I can keep the same space between all the slats, and I'm going to be using these across the build to make sure that everything sort of, you know, is equally spaced. Now, as for the mounting of the slats, I'm going to be using a piece of hardwood that is going to be fixed to the metal frame of the roof rack, and then the slats will be fixed to this hardwood. So this way I can get the slats totally aligned and perfectly mounted on this piece, and then put the whole thing together on top of the metal structure. Here you can see what this is going to look like. The hardwood piece is going to be under the slats and connecting and perfectly aligned with the metal frame underneath. I'm going to be using two of these so that the Ikea slats are totally fixed and not moving at all. My first approach was to try to mount this off the roof, but this turned out to be quite a disastrous idea, and I had to sort of stop and take a break to think of a better way to do this, because there are there is a curvature in both directions which made the mounting rather difficult. Here you can see me trying to put the hardwood pieces fixed to the roof rack with some, you know, failure on the clamps. But eventually I got there, and I managed to secure the hardwood pieces to the frame, which really shows the curvature in both directions of the car, which is what made the mounting of these pieces so challenging. Now, having fixed the two frame pieces, it was very easy to start putting again the slats in place to make sure that they are aligned the way I want and, you know, in the position where they're finally going to be mounted. Once in place, I needed to measure the distance between the two hardwood frame pieces to make sure that I pre-drill the holes on the slats at the right dimensions, and I do this with or paying a special attention to where the alignment is going to be and where I want the final piece to be actually in place. Once that was done, then I measure where the holes are going to be in the final slat, which eventually I'm going to be using as a template to drill the holes in all 14 pieces. And I also wanted to make sure that the hole will be exactly in the middle of the slat, so that I will get all the bolts right in the center. In order to drill this properly, I'm using a standard wood drill plus a little extra piece that drills a little bit of an extra space for the bolt to be below the surface of the wood. I figured that if I'm carrying something on the roof rack, I don't want anything to be caught on those bolts, and I want everything to be as smooth as possible. Once this was done, I checked that the bolt would fit in the hole that I just drilled and that everything would be a nice tight fit. And then once again I took the piece back to the roof to make sure that the holes were properly aligned and I could bolt this into the hardwood pieces and that everything was ready for, let's say, producing this en masse, and I could replicate this on all pieces that eventually are going to make it into the roof. At this point, spacing and alignment was key, because I would be mounting first one half of the roof rack and then the other half, so I had to make sure that the two pieces would fit in between the metal frame, both in the front and the back, with equal spacing, to make sure that everything would look nice and straight from both the front and the back. This was a dry test, so no glue, just a couple of bolts to make sure that everything would fit properly. And then once I was happy, I was ready for the next step, which was basically taking my slats and then using it as a template to make the drills in absolutely all the remaining pieces, which were, you know, quite a lot of them. I'm always using the same piece as a template, which is a good idea because this avoids basically the propagation of mistakes. Once I had all of them marked, then I only had to basically drill the holes, which again I use my template to make sure that the holes are in the right place and that everything is aligned with my marking and so on and so forth. Once all the holes were drilled, then I was ready to basically put this thing together. And the process was rather straightforward. I had to make sure that the spacing was right, that my first piece was correct, you know, in terms of alignment and spacing, because everything else will depend on that first slat. And then the mounting was rather straightforward. I used wood glue on the portions where the slat was touching the hardwood, and then some stainless steel bolts to keep them in place for the glue to dry. I took my time with this because I knew that if I screwed up on the first slat, then the entire roof rack will look sort of skewed at the end. So I wanted to make sure that I did everything I could to maintain the first two slats totally straight and centered. Once this was the case, it was just a simple copy-paste process, apply glue, use the spacing, put the bolts on, and then move on to the next slat. The reason I mounted this with the hardwood fixed to the frame was to ensure that the glue on the bolts will be done with the right curvatures, because there are curvatures in two directions. One is the natural direction of the slats that I'm using, and the other one is the direction in which the hardwood is bent. By doing it like so, then I ensure that I don't have, let's say, curvature correction errors at the end of the process. Once everything was in place, I removed the roof to install the last two pieces on the end that I couldn't do directly on the roof because the clamps were in place. And as I remove the clamps, you can see how the deck, the wood deck, now more or less keeps with the right curvature, and it doesn't completely become straight. Now I did mount the last two pieces at the end using the exact same procedure, the spacer, the glue, the bolts, and then that's basically it. I had to do this on both ends, and then once that was complete, then the entire roof rack, at least the structure, was complete. I also cleaned a bit of the excess glue because I wanted to have everything as clean as possible before I would treat the wood. Since I had cut my hardwood a bit longer than I needed, I trimmed the pieces on both ends. So I cut all 4 pieces to make sure that the roof rack was completely squared. I'm also going to be using stainless steel bolts to fix the wooden frame to the metal frame. And for this I also pre-drilled 6 holes in both hardwood pieces that would connect eventually with the metal frame. Now this is the final dry test in which I put the roof back on. You can see that it's a bit flatter than the curvature of the metal frame, but once you apply the clamps or the bolts, it will go right into place. And once I have it in the position that I want, I'm using a marker to mark where the holes need to be on the steel frame. Now I think this is one of the moments in which I made a small mistake, because I did mark the holes without using the clamps, which basically introduced a very small error on the position of those holes. And one of the holes in the frame ended up being quite a pain in the ass to actually make fit. Once I have all the holes in the frame, I'm ready to start treating the wood. And I'm going to be doing this in 2 steps. First, I'm going to be using what's called baits. It's a product that impregnates the wood and it prevents it from rotting. And since I removed all the varnish on the Ikea slats and the hardwood is untreated, this is basically very quickly absorbed by the wood, and it will prevent water coming in the harsh of winter. I've used this technique in other plywood projects outside, and together with varnish or so, it's actually very effective. Now at this point, this is looking quite neat, and I'm ready to apply the second coat, which is a varnish coat. Now I'm not going to be using a brush for this. I decided to use a spray-on varnish because it has a very quick drying time, so under 2 hours the varnish will be hard. And because I have a very small workshop, I just use some paper to make a screen for the varnish so I wouldn't make a mess on the wall. The varnish I'm using is suitable for wood and metal, and it has a very quick drying time of under 2 hours, or hardening time of under 2 hours. And it's semi-gloss, so this means that you don't get something super shiny, but something that will repel water and dust and other dirt that will come on it as I drive around. Now I did my best to make sure that I would cover not only the main surfaces, but also the borders, the pieces or the sides in between the slats, and so on and so forth. And I was very methodical and careful to go over every single piece of wood to make sure that I would apply an even layer of this product on the wood. Now the drying time was a couple of hours, so I had to wait a little bit until the underside was dry. And as it was drying, I took the time to work on a little side projects that I discovered on the car. The holding pieces of the roof rack were untreated, and they started to rust because of the rain. So I went ahead and cleaned the rust from the roof rack, but as you can see, this was not coming off so easily, so I had to use 255 grit sandpaper very lightly on the paint just to remove the rust. This was so light that did not damage the painting at all. It just removed the very surface rust that had transferred from the holding pieces to the roof rack. Once all 4 pieces were clean, then I wanted to build grommet for the holding piece, which I had painted on the same color as the roof rack, and for this I used the inner tube of a bicycle tire, which proved to be the perfect material to build a grommet from scratch. So I traced out the shape of the part, cleaned up the remainings of the marker, and then went ahead and cut the piece to size. It took a couple of tries to get the piece to fit the part neatly, but once I had a good template, I could just replicate this for all 4 holding pieces of the roof rack. I then cut a little hole in between to fit the bolt through the hole, and I was basically ready to go. This grommet would basically avoid vibrations, and it would avoid the metal touching the car directly, which will again prevent any further damage. I applied the last coating on the top side of the roof rack, and then after this I was basically getting ready for final assembly. I was quite excited, and I was hoping that it would be smooth sailing from here on, but that was not going to be the case. I moved the wood piece on top of the roof rack to make sure that everything still fit nicely, and I did some careful alignment to make sure that everything fit in place. Now remember when I said that I made a mistake when I was marking the holes from the hardwood to the metal, and that's exactly where this came to bite me in the ass. I did not bend the hardwood sufficiently, which means that the holes will not align properly, and it took quite a bit of doing to actually get this to work, and I had to redo one of the holes. Now I'm using stainless steel bolts, nuts and rings to make sure that this will withstand the weather. And again, I made some grommets out of the inner tube of a bicycle wheel to make sure that the vibrations caused by the wind or the engine will be minimized. After the painful installation, everything was ready, and all that was left was to go out, enjoy the sun, and take some nice shots of this super cool looking roof rack made out of an old Ikea bed. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did like the video, do subscribe and let me know what you think on the comments. Cheers!